All right, so welcome everyone to this discussion on a topic that we think is really important for a lot of you out there.
Yeah.
This is all thanks to ProTax Accountant. You know that, right?
Hmm.
Big accounting firm here in the UK.
Yep. They're well known.
Yeah, they are, and they actually reached out to us to put this together specifically for UK taxpayers, anyone who's really, interested in learning more about this thing called Orchestra tax relief.
Yeah. It's a pretty big deal for certain folks.
Huge. Yeah. And we want to kind of cut through all the, the noise and just give you the straight facts about how this relief works and maybe more importantly how it could actually, put some money back in your pocket if you're involved in orchestral productions at all.
Especially these days, right? It feels like every penny counts.
Oh, tell me about it. The economy and all that. I think, for the cultural sector in particular, this kind of thing is more crucial than ever. So let's dive right in.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
So when we talk about orchestra tax relief, what are we really talking about here?
Well, it boils down to this. If you're, running or funding orchestral performances, this is something that could really have a big impact on your bottom line.
Okay.
Orchestra tax relief, or OTR for short, was introduced back in 2016 as a way to, give some much needed support to orchestras all over Britain.
Right. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah, and it works through the corporation tax system. And the main thing to understand is that it can really significantly reduce your company's tax bill.
Oh, okay. So we're talking about actual, pounds and pence here.
Exactly. And what's even more interesting is that if a qualifying orchestral concert actually makes a loss, you might be able to claim a payable tax credit.
Oh, wow. So you could actually get money back.
That's right. So if you're putting on any kind of orchestral productions, this is definitely something you want to look into.
All right. So we've established it's about reducing tax, potentially even getting money back. But what are the actual numbers? Like, what kind of rates are we talking about these days? And how has that changed over time?
Well, what's really fascinating is how this support has actually been strengthened over the years. So as of April 1st, 2025, we now have these permanent relief rates of 40% for non-touring orchestral concerts.
40%? That's not bad.
No, it's not. And it gets even better because for touring orchestral productions or for any orchestral production, if you meet certain conditions, the rate jumps up to 45%.
Okay. So touring gets you a better rate.
It does, and these higher rates became permanent after a period of temporary boosts, and they replaced the original baseline rate, which was 25%.
So it's actually gotten more generous over time.
You have to give you an idea of the scale of this back in 2015 when the relief was first being considered. The Treasury estimated it would cost them around 10 to 15 million pounds annually.
Okay.
Fast forward to the estimated figures for 2024, 2025, and that number has actually grown to about 20 to 25 million pounds.
Wow. That's almost double.
Yeah, and that really shows you how important this relief has become and how many people are actually taking advantage of it. It suggests that more and more orchestras are aware of it and actually benefiting from it.
So it sounds like a pretty significant opportunity, but is it something that only a handful of organizations can actually access?
That's a great question, and it's really important to clarify that the Association of British Orchestras estimates that there are over 175 orchestras across the UK that could potentially be eligible for this relief.
175, that's quite a few.
It is, and it's interesting because HMRC's initial estimate back in 2016 was actually around 5,000 eligible companies.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah, it is, and it might indicate that the eligibility criteria are actually more specific than maybe initially thought, or maybe there's still a lack of awareness about the relief amongst some organizations.
Yeah, maybe.
We don't have the exact claim numbers for 2024, 2025 just yet, but data from before the pandemic,
Hmm.
around 2018, 2019, showed that there were hundreds of claims being submitted every year.
Okay.
And the average payout varied quite a bit, ranging from around 50,000 pounds to 100,000 pounds per company.
That's a decent chunk of change.
It is. It could really make a difference for a lot of organizations.
Definitely. And you mentioned something earlier about core costs and there being some kind of rule about that. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So there's a crucial rule that you need to be aware of regarding core costs, and this came into effect in April 2024. So at least 10% of these core costs, and we're specifically talking about expenses like rehearsal costs, not the actual performance fees themselves,
Okay.
must relate to activities that take place within the UK.
So the rehearsals have to happen in the UK.
That's right. At least 10% of them. This actually updated the previous requirement, which was broader and included activities within both the UK and the European Economic Area.
So it's gotten a bit more specific.
It has.
Okay, so that 10% UK core cost rule, that's really important. So let's just be crystal clear for everyone listening who exactly can claim this orchestra tax relief. What are the the absolute must-haves, the fundamental criteria?
Okay, so there are a few key points that determine your eligibility.
Okay.
First and foremost, your company needs to be incorporated here in the UK, and it has to be liable for corporation tax.
All right, so you got to be a UK company.
Exactly. Secondly, your company must be what's called the Orchestral Production Company, or the OPC.
OPC.
Yeah, and this means you're the one in charge of the entire concert production from start to finish. You handle the planning, you hire the musicians, you make all the big artistic and logistical decisions.
So you're the main driving force behind the whole thing.
Precisely. If you're just the venue providing the space or a subcontractor brought in for a specific part, you wouldn't usually qualify as the OPC.
Okay, so you have to be the main organizer.
Right. Then thirdly, the performance itself has to meet the definition of a qualifying orchestral concert.
So there are rules about the concert itself.
There are. So this means that it needs to be primarily performed by instrumentalists, at least 12 of them.
12 or more instrumentalists.
Yep. And they have to be the main focus of the event. You also need to have a live paying audience present, or the performance has to be specifically for educational purposes.
So it can't just be like a recording session or something.
Right. And another important point is that most of the instruments being used can't be electronically amplified.
So no electric guitars or anything like that.
Well, it depends. If it's a small part of the overall performance, it might be okay. But the majority of instruments should be acoustic. And unfortunately, performances that are only streamed online without a live audience don't currently qualify.
So it's really about supporting those live in-person performances.
Yeah, that's the focus. And then finally, as we've already touched on, at least 10% of your core production costs have to be based in the UK.
Right, that 10% rule.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a lot of information, but could you give us a real-world example? How would all of this actually play out for a typical orchestra?
Sure. Let's imagine a hypothetical orchestra. Let's call them the London Harmony Orchestra.
London Harmony Orchestra.
Yeah. And they decide to put on a series of concerts featuring the music of Beethoven.
Nice choice.
Now, in preparing for these concerts, they end up spending, let's say, £150,000 on costs that are directly related to the production. And all of these costs occur within the UK.
So things like renting rehearsal space and paying the musicians.
Exactly. Things like that. And maybe the cost of preparing sheet music here in the UK. Now, because the London Harmony Orchestra is a UK incorporated company, and they're the ones responsible for the whole production, they have at least 12 non-amplified instrumentalists. They're performing for a live audience, and they've met that 10% UK core cost threshold. They could very likely be eligible to claim 45% relief on those core costs.
Okay.
And that would work out to a pretty significant amount, about £67,500 in potential tax relief.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is, and that money can then go right back into supporting their artistic endeavors.
Yeah, that's a real game changer. So let's say someone's listening to this and thinking, hey, this sounds like it might apply to me. What do they actually need to do to claim this orchestra tax relief? How do they go about getting those benefits?
All right, so this is where it gets really important. The way you claim orchestra tax relief is through your company's annual corporation tax return using the CT600 form.
CT600.
Yeah, but there's a really important change that happened back in April 2024.
Okay.
Every claim now has to include an additional information form, or the AIF for short.
So there's an extra form now.
Yes, you absolutely have to include this form, and it needs to have all the detailed information that HMRC needs to properly assess your claim.
So that's something to keep in mind.
It is. Now, on a more positive note, there has been an extension to how long you have to submit or amend claims.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah. So for any accounting periods that started on or after April 1st, 2024, you now have 2 whole years from the end of the accounting period to make a claim.
So they've given you more time.
They have. It used to be just 1 year. So this gives companies a bit more breathing room.
Okay, so let's break this down into some actionable steps for anyone listening. What's the very first thing a company should do if they think they might be eligible?
Well, the first thing is to really carefully assess your own eligibility.
Yeah.
Go back and look at those criteria we talked about. Are you a UK incorporated company? Do you pay corporation tax? Are you the orchestral production company? Does your performance meet the definition of a qualifying orchestral concert?
With the 12 instrumentalists and the live audience.
Exactly. And can you confidently say that at least 10% of your core production costs are UK-based?
And remember, each individual concert, or if you have a series of concerts that are closely linked, and you decide to treat them as one single undertaking,
Right.
each of those is considered a separate trade for tax purposes.
Okay.
So you have to assess eligibility for each one individually.
So it's not a blanket thing.
Nope. Each concert or series is its own thing.
All right, and once you've figured out that you're eligible, what's next?
So step 2 is to get really organized with your cost tracking.
Cost tracking, yeah.
You need to identify and accurately record all of your core expenditure.
And just to remind everyone what kinds of things fall under core expenditure.
Right. So this includes any costs that are directly tied to the production leading up to the performance itself.
Okay.
Things like renting rehearsal venues here in the UK, the wages you pay to musicians specifically for their rehearsal time, any travel expenses if they have to go to unusual rehearsal locations, and even the cost of getting sheet music. So it's all the prep work, essentially.
Exactly. Now it's just as important to know what doesn't count as core expenditure.
Right. So what do you need to leave out?
The things that are typically excluded are the actual performance fees that you pay to musicians for the concerts themselves.
Okay.
Any costs related to marketing and promoting the concert, and any financing expenses that your company might have.
So it's very specific.
It is. And another crucial point is that since April 2024, only the UK portion of these core costs is what you'll use to calculate your relief.
Right. So even if you have some rehearsals abroad, only the UK costs matter.
That's right.
Okay, so you've checked your eligibility, you've tracked all your relevant UK-based costs. Now, this is the part I think everyone's really waiting for. How do you actually calculate the relief?
All right, so this is step 3, the number crunching part.
Okay.
Remember those two main relief rates, 40% for non-touring orchestral concerts and 45% for the ones that tour or that meet the broader criteria for an orchestral production.
Right, 40% or 45%.
Exactly. Now, there are two main ways that this relief can actually benefit you financially. The first is as a tax deduction.
Okay.
So you can claim what's called an enhancement, which is equal to 100% of your qualifying UK core costs.
100%.
Yeah. This enhancement is then added to all your other allowable business expenses, which reduces your overall taxable profits, and that means you pay less corporation tax.
So it's like a bonus deduction?
Kind of. Now, the second way this can work is if your concert trade actually ends up making a loss.
Right.
So if that happens, you have the option to surrender some or all of that loss to HMRC, and they'll give you a cash credit back.
So you can actually get money back.
You can. And the rate at which they convert that loss into a payable credit is either 40% or 45%, depending on whether it's touring production or not.
Okay, so touring is better again.
It is in this case.
Can you walk us through a quick example of how this tax deduction or payable credit might work, in a real life scenario?
Of course.
Oh.
Let's say we have a company called Manchester Strings Co.
Manchester Strings Co. Love it.
And they put on a series of touring orchestral performances.
They're going on tour.
They are. And let's say they rack up £60,000 in qualifying core costs, all of which are based in the UK.
£60,000 in UK costs.
Yep. Now, let's say that before factoring in any tax relief, these concerts end up making a small profit of £20,000.
Okay. A modest profit?
Right now, because they had £60,000 in UK core costs, they can claim a tax enhancement of that same amount, £60,000.
So they get to deduct that full £60,000.
They do, and they deduct it from their £20,000 profit, which actually creates a taxable loss of £40,000.
Oh, wow. So they went from a profit to a loss.
They did on paper, and because it was a touring production, they can now choose to surrender this £40,000 loss to HMRC.
Okay.
And they'll receive a cash payment equal to 45% of that loss.
45% of 40,000.
Yep. So in this case, they would get £18,000 back from HMRC instead of having to pay tax on their initial £20,000 profit.
So they actually end up with more money than they made from the concerts.
That's right.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
That really shows you the power of this relief.
It does. It can really make a huge difference.
All right, so we've gone through the calculations now. What are the final steps to actually submit your claim and get that relief money?
So step 4 is all about the official filing process with HMRC. You'll need to fill out your company's corporation tax return, that's the CT600.
CT600, got it.
And you have to submit it online through HMRC's portal. Within this return, you need to include all the specifics about your qualifying orchestral concert trade and very clearly show how you calculated your tax enhancement or any loss that you want to surrender.
Okay, so it's not just about sending in the form. You have to show your work, so to speak.
Exactly. And this is where it's super important to remember what we talked about earlier. You have to submit that additional information form, the AIF, at the same time as your tax return.
That AIF is crucial.
It is. And it's always a good idea to file everything well in advance of that 2-year deadline. Even though you have that long, HMRC can sometimes take a while to process claims, maybe 8 to 12 weeks.
So don't wait till the last minute.
Exactly. Now, the final step, step 5, is to be prepared in case HMRC comes back asking for more information.
Okay, so they might do a follow-up.
They might. Every now and then, they might ask for some extra documentation to back up the details you provided in your claim. This could be things like receipts for your rehearsal venue, hire contracts with your musicians, that kind of thing.
So keep good records.
Absolutely. Having really thorough and accurate records throughout this whole process is super important. We've actually seen cases where companies haven't kept good records, and it's cost them. There was this audit involving, let's say, the Edinburgh Symphony, just as an example,
Edinburgh Symphony.
where because their records were a bit messy and incomplete, they ended up getting a much smaller amount of relief than they were initially hoping for.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so having those solid records really is key to a smooth and successful claim.
It's all about dotting your I's and crossing your funds.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredibly helpful walkthrough of orchestra tax relief.
Okay.
Now, for anyone listening who thinks this might apply to their orchestra production company, or if you have some more specific questions about your own circumstances, what would you recommend they do?
Well, if this has piqued your interest and you think your company might be eligible for orchestra tax relief, or if you just have some more detailed questions that are specific to your situation, the best thing you can do is reach out to the experts at Pro Tax Accountant.
Our tax accountant?
They have a ton of experience with this kind of complex tax relief stuff, and they can give you personalized advice and support to guide you through the whole application process.
Okay, so they can help you navigate all the ins and outs.
Exactly. They'll make sure you understand all the little details and help you get the most out of any potential benefits that might be available to you.
So they're the go-to people for this. Great. Well, a huge thank you to Pro Tax Accountant for arranging this really informative discussion for us today. And thank you to everyone listening for your time and for tuning in to this important information. We hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's been great having you here, and we'll see you all next time.
Sounds good.